Welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author, Austin Ruse. The book, Under Siege, No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic, published by Crisis Publications, available naturally through the EWTN Religious Catalog. EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic. Always great to see you, Austin.
Nice to see you.
So they let you out of the UN once in a while, though?
You know, I've got some very good people up there who spend all their days doing that kind of work, and so that, yeah, I get away with pretty much whenever I need to.
CFAM, that's the organization. What do they do?
CFAM, we were founded in 1997 at the request of the Holy See. We assist governments in negotiating documents, primarily to ensure that abortion doesn't become an internationally recognized human right, that they don't redefine the family, that they don't make sexual orientation and gender identity a new category of non-discrimination. So most of our work is focused on negotiating documents with UN delegations.
Okay, Mary Eberstadt, who's a lot of people would know as an author, says it's an audacious book by an audacious man. And back in 2017, we had Little Suffering Souls and Fake Science. That was pretty audacious as well. What makes you so audacious?
Boy, that's a question I've never, ever gotten before. You know, it goes back to my childhood. I never said uncle to a bully. I was a skinny kid with glasses and got bullied a little bit. And, you know, having my face ground into the grass, I never, ever said uncle.
Uncle.
And my view now is to never say uncle and to advance the cause in audacious ways. So I guess that's why. I'm motivated a little bit by anger that a bunch of people at the United Nations and elsewhere can tell the rest of us how to live our lives in minute ways. So that's why.
Let me ask you, you've got Under Siege, so that's one. Then you transpose that to No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. You say, I don't remember when the first time I gave that speech, it was years ago. You say at the annual Catholic Leadership Conference, the idea for a book was first raised by the great and good man, of course, our friend Mike Aquilina. So how do you put those two things together?
Well, I'll tell you, we look back upon certain generations with great envy, and they are the generations that lived under great strife and even in desperate times. I think of the generation after the founding of our church. I think of the generation that fought the founding of the United States. I think of the Depression, the Civil War, the Second World War. In similar ways, we are under very similar desperate situations these days. Our enemies are camped all around us. And my response to that is not to cower in fear or distraction or any of the other ways that you avoid the present situation, but to embrace it, because this is the time that he sent us to, and he knows what he's about. And these are desperate times, and I say that's quite amazing that he sent the likes of us.
Well, you talk about fear in the book. Are we afraid because we don't believe that the Lord's really with us?
I think that some people are afraid simply because these are fearful times. That, you know, they may know that the Lord is with us, but that does not mean that you can't be afraid. I mean, you can be desperately afraid. But often the result of that is Lot's wife, staring at the evil all around you and not being able to move, not being able to act. And I think a lot of people are that way. And so I started giving this talk and wrote this book to talk about what a remarkable time we live in. And one of the analogies that I use in the book is, let's charge the sniper's nest.
Right.
Joyfully.
Full Metal Jacket is the reference you use, right, for that. Right.
Yeah, one of the great Vietnam movies.
Right.
Very much like a World War II movie because it's fought at a city rather than in the jungle.
It's interesting because Way was actually a victory for the U.S., but not perceived as that. In fact, that was the beginning of the end for us in Vietnam.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
totally
it was the Tet Offensive, and it was a failure on the ground, but it was a victory in terms of propaganda. Absolutely. But the movie is quite remarkable, and the scene that I talk about is when a platoon is pinned down behind a wall because there's a sniper, and the platoon leader says, we cannot refuse to accept the situation. And one of his men, goes by the name of Cowboy Mother, straps on his machine gun, jumps over the wall, and charges the sniper's nest. He refuses to accept the situation, and that's the position that we're in. I say that Rod Dreher is like the platoon leader, that we cannot refuse to accept the situation. Let's cower behind this wall. And I kind of like to think that I'm cowboy
So
mother.
that's kind of the Benedict option.
That's the, yeah, that's right.
Well, it's interesting too, because that wasn't your initial opinion when you first saw the movie.
That's right.
You kind of had that position as well. It's only later you came to see it differently.
I
Why?
misunderstood what I forget the platoon leader's name, what he was really saying. I thought that he was saying that we have to accept the situation as it is and proceed. Right. But no, what he meant was we cannot refuse the situation, we have to hunker down behind this wall. Right. And my eyes were opened after seeing the movie again, and I realized what exactly happened, and that the platoon leader cowboy was wrong, but animal mother was right. And I think that we need to be animal mother in one way or another. Right. Not everybody is like us, charging the sniper's nest.
And why did you make the point that it ends up being the platoon leader who dies?
Well, because in the movie, it is the platoon leader who dies, and not cowboy mother. And to me, that's a little bit of a lesson, that if you hide behind the wall...
doesn't mean you're safe.
It doesn't. Well put. It doesn't mean that you're safe.
Right, okay. You say in the introduction, we live these days in a dark valley. You say, in my many years of writing columns and essays, I have spent a lot of time staring into the abyss. And you say, but this is the work God has given me to do, to look into the abyss and to tell you what I see. Why do you think that's your job?
You know, God shows us what to do through the people that He introduces us to, and through the situations that He places us in. And what He has introduced me to and the situations that He has put me in is precisely the work that I've been doing since '97, since we founded CFAM, and when I started writing columns back many years ago for when we started the Catholic thing. This is the job that He has given me to do. There's a line in there also from the movie Blade Runner. Right. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. I've seen attack ships on fire on the shoulder of Orion, so on and so forth. It's a lovely scene in a pretty terrific movie. Well, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe because I have looked. My wife and I often joke, I wish we didn't know all the things that we know, you know, and all the words that we know for certain things. But some people have to look because they have to be able to turn around and tell other people what's going on. And that's one of the major purposes of the book.
Yeah, you kind of roll out. In chapter 1, we descend into the abyss. Some of what we see will be known to you. Some will be new, and you show the accurate landscape. What would be new to people, do you think? Well,
I don't think that in fact, as a matter of fact, I know for a fact that most people don't know the specifics of everything that's going on. They don't know the specifics of what's being taught in the Fairfax County school system, which I will not share with your audience right now because it's a family show. But they will also not know the name of a company called MindGeek, which I write about.
Which you talk about in the book.
MindGeek receives more traffic than any other group of websites in the world, more than Facebook, more than Amazon. They have exponentially more income than Netflix, for instance. And it's a family, if you'll excuse the term for this, of inappropriate sites that have addicted many people to nasty behavior. So most people have never heard of MindGeek.
Pornography.
That's right. That's right. I don't know how explicit we can be here. But you know, when I give talks and I ask people who here has heard of MindGeek, nobody's heard of MindGeek. But MindGeek is one of the great poisoners of young minds that has ever existed in the world. And so that's one of the things that people don't know.
Chapter 2, I explain how we ended up in this dreadful place. It's not simply bad luck or bad fate. You go on to talk about the wall of separation between church and state, and the wall has been breached, but not in the way liberal media says it has been breached. How so?
Well, yeah, you know, the separation of church and state, it was really meant to protect us, believers, from the incursion by the state. And it's mostly been used against us if we want to put a cross on so-called public land, for instance. They say that we have violated the separation of church and state. But I go a step further and point out that the state has established a new church. And this is probably a new argument in the book, that many people say, well, you know, the environmentalism seems like a new religion, or sex obsession seems like a new religion. I go a step further and I say that this is a newly established church in the United States that is going after heretics. And who are the heretics? It's us. You know, we used to have prayer in school. Now we have, what do we have in school? We have little kids being taught that sex is assigned at birth and that little boys can be born in the wrong body. These are religious claims, and that's what people need to internalize. And when they force little children to use quote-unquote proper pronouns, that is forced religious speech, denying our own Christian understanding of the human person and making us repeat their dogma.
Right.
This is a new faith that is being established by the state.
And then you roll into chapter 3 with the state church. We discover who are the priests and prophets and what its mission is. Talk about the nuns, of course, not our nuns, but the NONES nuns.
Yeah.
You go on to say, in fact, the nuns are not nothing. They are deeply religious, and in many ways they have helped form the denomination of the new state church. They consider Christians to be the new heretics, as you said. They treat us accordingly.
You know, a lot of people have first of all, the misunderstanding about secularism. Secularism used to be a religious term. It has come to mean without God. And all the people that are leaving, you know, no longer checking the box Christian, they're checking the box that says none. But as I say here, and I've made the argument in columns at Crisis Magazine, they aren't nothing. We live in a deeply religious age. I wrote extensively in the book about Gwyneth Paltrow, the actress, and her company called Goop, G-O-O-P, Goop. It is a deeply religious movement. It's part of the wellness movement, $1 trillion a year religious movement called Wellness. And on her show, she has had a chiropractor he lays people out on a table, and this is on one of her Netflix shows, and he would run his hands above their body and below their body, and they would writhe like they were having an exorcism or something. I mean, it's really odd. And his claim, and she accepts it, is that there's energy around all of our bodies and that you could see it, and the world is, the universe is 94% energy, and we come from energy, we're going to return to energy. These are religious claims, and people have to understand, when those nuns start practicing wellness, this is not a purely secular endeavor. It is a religious endeavor.
Kind of religion.
That's right.
Well,
and this is everywhere.
Goop sounds like a good name for it. In chapters 4 and 5, you talk about the history, and then you explore the understanding situation we're in. But then you also end up at the end, you say that we're going to have joy in chapter 7. In fact, you go on to say our descendants will envy it just as we envy the time of our founding generation. Why are they going to be so envious?
Look at the generations that we admire the most. And those are the generations that went through great struggle and came out the other side. And I think of the generation after the founding of the church and the persecution. We look back with great envy upon those people. I look at the founding of this country. It was a desperate time. We admire those people. I think of the Civil War. We admire those people. I think of the Depression, World War II. We look back with great envy upon generations that had to struggle and overcome that struggle. And so, you know, we were not made for the ease and comfort of the 50s. We're made for struggle. And so our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, their children will look back upon this time, I think, with great envy, precisely because it's so hard. And they'll look with great envy at the people who you know, fought the good fight.
Right. Well, even in the 50s, we always had the threat of nuclear war, you know.
We did.
Duck and cover there.
We did.
You talk about transgenderism, and we hear about that totally today, you know, something that really, as you point out, you know, kind of began at the fringes and suddenly is all over the place. But I thought this was, at its base, the idea is that God or nature made a mistake, and with some people gave them the wrong reproductive organs. On top of that is piled the assertion that the failure is not actually God's or nature's, but rather ours for failing to perceive this unusual color of the rainbow.
Right. You know, transgenderism, you know, you always hope that the next thing is going to be the bridge too far. And sadly, it never seems to work out that way. One hopes that transgenderism is the bridge too far, particularly as it occurs with children, which is the advance guard of transgenderism. You know, in my book, Fake Science, I went and I counted the number of times that transgender was used in the pages of the New York Times. And I looked at 1995, the year 2000, 2005, up to the Obergefell decision. It was used like twice in the entire year of 1995, a few more times in the year 2000. It exploded in the year 2015. The last year that I counted was 2016, and there were 1,100 mentions of transgender in the New York Times. For me, that's revealing because they realized after the Obergefell decision that they had gotten pretty much everything that they wanted, and what else could they ask for? Oh, we've got to keep the sexual revolution alive through transgenderism.
Yeah, you make that point that to some degree after that victory they needed to, if they were going to continue to have power and authority and fundraise and things, they needed another issue. But it seems like there's even some conflict sometimes between the standard LGBT, LG community and the transgender community, because it's kind of like, are you gay or are you transgender? Because in some ways you can argue that they run counterintuitively to one another.
It's not a happy coalition. You know, the homosexual men don't much care for the lesbians, and the lesbians don't much care for the homosexual men. And nobody really likes the transgenders. In my book, Fake Science, I wrote about how gay men and lesbians have been upset that a little girl who plays with trucks is no longer considered lesbian.
Right.
She's considered transgender, and they say let her grow up to be a happy lesbian. Right. But this is not happening anymore because they're automatically funneled into a gender counseling office who almost immediately puts them on puberty blockers, then cross-sex hormones, and God forbid surgery. So yeah, there is tension within that coalition.
Right. And it's interesting, as we mentioned, the idea that it happened so quickly. Also the idea, as you indicated, as one person said, who then regretted what happened to them when transitioning. When I was transitioning, said no one in the medical or psychological field ever tried to dissuade me. There's increasing research that shows that those on the autism spectrum, I thought that was have an unusually high propensity for gender confusion. So again, the idea is these people are being like accepted or encouraged.
That's right. There's a man in Canada named Ken Zucker who ran a gender counseling program, and his goal always was to help the person become comfortable in their own skin. He was run out of the business because the way that they do it now is that you automatically accept their desire to be a new sex, and if you don't help them down that road, somehow you're doing violence to them. So this is what's happening now. 10 years ago there were 5 or 6 gender counseling clinics in the United States. Now there's probably 70. So it is really an epidemic.
Is there some aspect of cultural fashion to this, in the sense of meaning if it's a way of an individual in a time in their lives when they may be struggling for who they are to have a unique identity or an interesting identity that attracts attention? When I look back at pictures of myself back in the 70s in high school, I kind of recognize myself, but not really. We did a panel at the UN now 4 or 5 years ago on this topic, and there was a young man there who looked just like a regular guy, but he had dangly earrings. And I asked him what he was, and he said he was gender non-binary. And I was thinking, man, your kids are going to chuckle when they see pictures of you looking like a regular person with dangly earrings. So I think that for a lot of this is fashion, it is political, it is maybe a little bit psychological, that people will move through as they age. And I think a number of them, as long as they don't go through puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgery, will look back and kind of chuckle at what they did and how they acted, just like we all do when we look back and we look at what we did and how we acted when we were teenagers. Also, the time we're taping this, the Olympics are ongoing, so transgender boys are being allowed to participate in athletics with real girls. These transmogrified girls are winning the awards, and often the college athletic scholarships. Real girls are left high and dry. Are you surprised that the feminist movement wasn't more on top of this or more against this? But I think that they are. That there are an awful lot of feminists who came out really early against this. There's a feminist organization called Wolf that has been very aggressive on this. I look at a feminist like J.K. Rowling, who has refused to go along with this. That's true, right. So there's a slur that is used against the feminists who are against this. They're called TERFs, T-E-R-F. Can't think of what that means.
transgender. Anyway, so yeah, there is a vanguard of radical feminists who have been against this. There's a vanguard of radical feminists who have been against pornography. There's an interesting coalition that has been working together, Christian conservatives and radical feminists on these two issues, and it's interesting.
And you talk obviously in here about pornography, you talk about the problems with the internet, with young children, and you also talk about the revolting sexual indoctrination is not only part of the darkness, the schools are also teaching your kids to hate Christianity and their own country, as I think it's clear that's what's going on. It
is quite astounding what is happening now in school boards around this country. Critical race theory, for instance, I think is turning an entire generation of moms into little Phyllis Schlaflys, and I think therefore it is a little bit of a blessing. We, my wife principally and her friends and others around the country, have been fighting the transgender radical sex ed fight in the school board now for years, and it's critical race theory that seems to be waking a lot of moms up in the way that transgenderism wasn't able to. So it's a great fight that's going on right now.
Well, it's virtually telling the children that their parents are racist.
Well, yeah, and yeah, you know, critical race theory. It's you know, your country was badly founded. It was founded in racism. It goes on in racism. Everything is racism. But boy, that message has gotten a lot of traction among young people.
Absolutely.
Right. It is a frightening moment, I think, to a large extent because of that.
Yeah, I think we don't realize it until the topic comes up and we realize maybe our kids' perspective is a little different than we were taken aback by their seeming support of some of those ideas that you would have thought, oh, well, my kid doesn't think that, obviously.
Well, it hasn't happened in our household just yet, and we talk about these kind of things all the time because my wife and I are kind of professionals in this field, and so the table talk, our children knew early on.
You were a pro-life power couple.
So our children know all about this at this point. But you know, and we're, you know, they're going to an Opus Dei high school there in Virginia called Oakcrest, and we're pointing them toward University of Dallas. So hopefully they will not. But even in Oakcrest, you know, these ideas seep in with girls who came over from the public schools. So you cannot escape it.
Right, exactly. You also see children are groomed in school, but did you know they were also groomed through video games? How so?
Well, there was a company of video games that I have looked at, which are purely pornographic, that gives you a point of view of actual rape, and these video games are quite popular. There's really no way to escape this. If your child has a smartphone, they're going to run across this kind of thing. Our daughters don't have smartphones. I mean, they have iPhones, but they're not connected to the internet. They're used as cameras and music purveyors. But even in video games, these types of things appear. It is like demons circling around the heads of our children, you know. And when you think of schools, my friend Pat Fagan, who you may know, talks about how the Sultan would kidnap Christian children and turn them into an army precisely to go after Christians. And he said this is precisely what the public schools are doing, is that public schools are part of the problem. You raise your child as a believing Christian, and then you hand them over to this propaganda army at the public schools, who then turn them against you, just like the Sultan did.
I thought, obviously, pro-life was a big thing in your career. Now abortion is promoted as a positive good that should be celebrated, and that's the whole thing we have, obviously, with Joe Biden, the president. Abortion has become one of the chief sacraments in the new religion. And I remember they used to attack pro-lifers as saying, oh, well, men can have babies, abortion would be a sacrament. Well, it is a sacrament, but it's their sacrament.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, the good news, and I like to talk about good news, the good news is that we may see the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the coming. I mean, this won't end the battle over abortion, but the pro-life movement has done amazing work over the last several decades in, first of all, keeping the issue alive. 25 years ago, 35% of the American people self-identified as pro-life. Now it's 49, 50, 51%. Hundreds of local pro-life laws have been passed in the last decade. We're chipping away at Roe v. Wade. It shows you that culture war battles can be won. And I'm confident that we will win this one also. And one of the points that I make in the book is the culture war is a war of defense. It is a defensive war because the culture war was begun by the left 50 or 60 years ago and has been aimed directly at the Christian people. So this is a just war. They always claim that you're a culture warrior. It is a war of defense.
Good point. And there's so much in here. You talk the catastrophic climate change becomes a little bit of a heresy, can get someone communicated from the state church, that idea. If you don't buy into that right away, you're attacked. You say extreme environmentalism even takes on aspects of a death cult, and that environments also have the Sacrament of Confession. What's their Sacrament of Confession?
Well, literally, I think it was Time Magazine put up a confession page of people who had done things wrong to the environment. And it's kind of pathetic. But it literally is confession, where you go onto their site and you list your confession that you ate meat too much, or you tried to do this and you failed.
Carbon footprint was too large.
That's right. Things like that. Things like that.
Try to do better.
Yeah. It's very interesting. In my research, I came across a line from Alexis de Tocqueville, who said, in 1840, Americans will eventually have to choose between pantheism and Catholicism. He did not say pantheism and Christianity because he saw then that Protestantism would shatter and not be able to stand up to pantheism. It's pantheism or Catholicism. And I think to a large extent that's what we're seeing now.
Very good. And people, there's a lot more in this book. We just about touched on Under Siege, No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. Austin Ruse, thank you so much for writing this book. A lot to think about. Available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic. I'm Doug Keck. Thank you for stopping by. We'll see you next time.